Hi, everyone. So, you have immigration questions, and I have answers for you today. A lot of you have been sending me questions, or these questions came from consultations I have had that people just have the same questions, and I want to answer those for you. And just so you know, I am U.S. immigration attorney Lilian, and I help my clients get green cards and citizenships for themselves and their families using the U.S. immigration law system. Can you please share more tips on marriage, green card, interview questions, and preparation? Let's talk about it some more. Because this is like I said in my recent video, this is a place where people really get nervous and not sure what to expect. So let's talk about it some more. When it comes to your interview, you need to be prepared. Okay, you need to have all your documents, original documents. So anything you send to USCIS, you need to have the original of it. So, for example, if you send in your birth certificate, you need to have your original birth certificate for the interview. Your marriage certificate, original for the interview, because some officers may not want to see it, while other ones want to see it. So you want to make sure that you have those originals. And if you look at your interview notice, it tells you to bring the originals. Just because you get to your interview and the officer doesn't ask for the originals does not mean you shouldn't have taken it with you. It just means the officer did not want to see it. Okay. You don't want to be in a position where you get to your interview and you get that one officer that wants to see every single original document that you sent in. All right. You don't want that. So be prepared ahead of time. Have all your documents. If you send in bank statements, if you send in tax returns, update all of those. And then, as far as the interview itself, you and your spouse need to be on the same page about a few things. One being, how did you meet? Where did you meet? When did you meet? Where did you go on your first date? When did you go on your first date? Who proposed? When did they propose? When did you get married? You know, who was at the wedding? Where was the wedding? Did you go on a honeymoon? If you did, where, when? Right? A lot of the question is when, where, what, how, how many people were there, who do you live with, how many people live in your residence. You need to know these things for your marriage-based interview, because the officer, when they're asking you about your home, they are trying to gauge whether you actually live in that home. Okay. That's why they're asking you those questions. They're not asking you to be intrusive. They want to gauge, how much do you actually know about this home that you say you live in. So pay attention to your home if you have not been paying attention. Okay. I have had officers ask what colors at the wall, what type of window coverings are in the living room, right? Is it blinds? Is it curtains? Is it, what is it? I've had that. And then one of the harder questions I've had officers ask is, imagine my office is your bedroom. Tell me where everything will be. Like, most people just look at the officer confused, but I've had this happen like twice now, where the officer asks, imagine my office is your bedroom, and the door to the office is where your door is. Where is everything else? And they draw it out. As you're talking, you're like, okay, there's two windows on the left wall. From the door, there's a dresser right next to the wall, next to the door. There's the bed on this wall. The officer is busy drawing it out. And then when your spouse comes in and they ask, they ask them the same question, they're looking to make sure that you two are putting everything on the same wall, that the bed is where you say it is. If you say that there's dressers, that they're in the same position. If you say there's a window, they're in the same position, right? All of those things, it seems little, right? But it does matter. So take a walk around your home. and really understand where things are. Right? If you're not a person that cooks, please go check what type of stove you have. Is it gas or electric? Because I've had officers ask that. All right. If you have your trash picked up, what day of the month? What day does the trash people come to pick up your trash? Right. These are questions I've had officers ask. I'm not making this up. This is just what I have heard and witnessed. Um, Officers ask my clients. So you want to be ready for these questions. Where does your spouse work? How long have they worked there? What's their work schedule? And then if you walk in there and you say that their work schedule changes every week, the officer may then ask you, what was their work schedule last week? If you're in the interview on a Friday, they may ask you, what was their work schedule this week? Right? So far in the week, how many days have they worked? What days? What hours? What time do they get home from work? Right? How much do you pay for rent? If you have a sibling living with you and your spouse, do they contribute to the rent? Right? How do you split your utilities with the roommate? Whether it's your sibling, whether it's, you know, someone that's not related to you. The officer wants to know these things, right? So when you are preparing, you want to be preparing for all of that. And like I said, I do have a video where I go through interview questions. All right. I also offer a mock interview process. So if people are interested in a mock interview where I will basically pretend to be the officer and ask you questions as if I'm the officer and then give you your results at the end, you can also schedule a strategy session with me just so we can figure out if that's the best thing for you and then move forward from there. But yeah, we do mock interviews with my clients and we offer mock interviews for people that are going on their own and just want that extra preparation before they get there. How will you prepare your marriage based green card application to not be called for interviews, the necessary documents to present? Thank you. I do have a video that will give you all the tips and tricks to get you basically try to get you not to have an interview. All right. Just because you include everything I said does not mean an officer will not schedule you for an interview. All right. That's just something to keep in mind. So as you are prepare your application so that the officer can basically check every single box that they have. So do you live together? Do you present yourself as married couple? Do you have joint financial responsibility? Do you put your money together? Do you tell the world that this person is your spouse? Do you communicate with each other? Right? You want to be checking off those boxes. So that's on the I-130. So I know when people talk about marriage-based green card, they focus more on the green card, but when it comes to your actual marriage, like questions about your marriage and all of that, that's the I-130. Okay, that's where the officer makes that decision of whether your marriage is real or not. So you want to make sure that you have documentation meeting all those requirements. So joint residence is a huge one, showing that you and your spouse live together. So that can be lease, that can be bills in both names, right? The bills also goes to financial responsibilities, right? Bank statements shows joint financial assets and financial responsibilities, because then you can use your joint bank account to show that you're paying your bills together, right? You can have a portion of your income go into your joint bank account to pay those expenses. So you want to make sure that you are including as much as possible. Okay. If you are just including pictures, that's not going to be enough. Okay. So pictures are great. visual aids are good, but joint taxes, joint bank statements, joint lease, mortgage, all of that is more important. If you have children together, including the birth certificate for the kids in your application, that is what's going to get you a higher chance of not having an interview. All right. Showing that the non US citizen meets the requirements for a green card, right? That they came in with some form of either a visa or parole, and that their visa qualifies them to adjust status. There are some visas, like a C1 visa, will not allow you to adjust your status in the US. So it's really important that you make sure that you're showing that your visa qualifies you to adjust status. That you entered on that visa, that you are including either the visa stamp when you came in or your I-94 to show that, again, you meet the requirements. If you've ever had any criminal history, you are most likely not having your interview waived. Sorry to be a bearer of bad news. If there's ever been an issue with you, applying for a visa, being denied, and then applying again and being approved, things like that, you're most likely going to have an interview. If this is your second time applying with a different spouse, you're most likely going to have an interview. But if this is your first time ever applying and every time you apply for a visa, you got approved, you have a better chance. And then part of your process, you want to include your medical exam report, because that way, if they do want to approve your case without an interview, they can just have everything they need, right? Typically, they will send you a request for evidence for the medical exam, but if you send it in ahead of time, you're able to get that waived. So most people are going to have an interview. And I know like everyone wants their interview to be waived, but that is not typical. Okay? That is not typical. Most people, the majority of people are going to have an interview. Only a few people don't have interviews. So it's something that people always, want to talk about and hope for, right? It's a good thing to hope for. But just know, in a typical marriage-based green card process, you are going to have an interview. And the shorter your marriage is, even more likely you're going to have an interview. Okay, so let's say you just got married and you filed within a month or so of that marriage. The officer, you're not going to have a lot of documentation together. So the officer is most likely going to schedule you for an interview. All right. So it's about not about the quantity, but the quality of the evidence that you're sending in, and whether the officer still has questions after looking at your documents. All right. That's really the key there. Does the officer feel like they have everything they need to just go ahead and approve your case without questions? If they feel like they still have questions, they're going to schedule you for an interview. So, like I said, most people are going to have interviews. Most of my clients get interviews. Okay. It's perfectly normal. And I think, once USCIS started saying that once they were given, the officers were given the authority to waive interviews, people really started thinking that that's going to be more widespread, but it's not. Okay. It is not, but it all comes down to documentation, your immigration history, and your criminal history. Okay. Depending on what's in your background, your spouse's background is what's going to determine if the officer feels they have enough or not. Yes, you want your interview to be waived, but the focus should not be on having your interview waived. It should be on having your marriage believed, right? Don't focus on having your interview waived, because having an interview does not mean that the officer doesn't believe in your marriage. Having an interview does not mean the officer does not believe in your marriage. I'll give you an example. We just recently had an interview. The bulk of the interview was about the client's asylum application, right? They filed for asylum before they got married and applied for a green card through the marriage. So it's not that the officer doesn't believe your relationship, is that there may be something in your immigration file that the officer has questions about, and that's where they are needing to talk to you to just make sure that everything they have there makes sense, right? You've had people send you documents or send you a text or whatever, and you're just like, I don't know if this is what I think it is, or if there's something else going on here. And then you talk to the person and you're like, oh, now I get it. Now I understand why that said what it said, and that's why things are the way they are, right? So just think about it that way. Most officers are going to schedule people for interviews because they want to hear you say on the oath that this marriage is real, and that, ask you all sorts of questions on the oath. Okay. So that's really what it's about. It's not, so when you do have an interview scheduled, just know it's not a question of whether your marriage is real. Okay. Most of the time, that's not the question. Some of the times it is. Okay. Some of the times the officer did some quick research and found some negative things, and now wants to meet with you and your spouse to just find out if the negative things are actually negative, or if there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for it. Okay. So the interview is an opportunity for you. Okay. It's an opportunity for you to show the officer through your answers, through your interactions, that your marriage is real. And that starts from when you walk in the door. All right. Not when the officer calls you into their office, but when you walk into the USCIS building, that's when the whole thing starts. Because you don't know who's watching you at all times. So from the time you walk into the door, actually drive into the parking lot, to the time you leave that parking lot, just assume that you are being watched. Okay. So all your interactions are being watched. That's what I tell my clients. Just to reiterate, if you have bank statements, include as many of it as possible and make it as clear to the officer as possible what the expenses are on those bank statements. And if you are scheduled for an interview and you included bank statements, please know what the transactions are on your bank statements. Because let's say, one spouse spent $1,000 on something, and the officer asks you, what was this $1,000 for? And you're sitting there saying you don't know. That's a problem, because if it's a joint account, it's reasonable to believe that you two use the account. So both of you should know what's going through the account, especially if it's $1,000 or more, right? A significant amount of money leaving your account, you should know what that is. So again, it's not just about having a bank account. It is not just about having a bank account. You have to use it, and you have to know what's going through it. If you want to schedule a strategy session or getting help with your green card process, your citizenship process, you can go to my website, lilylegal.com, or call my office at 508-443-1788 just to schedule that strategy session and get you on the right track to your green card.